Today is Mental Health Monday. We're looking at the importance of men's mental health coupled with grief. And joining us to share tips on prioritizing your mental health is Natalie Poole. Thanks a lot for coming in, Natalie.
Always a pleasure.
So we're just coming off of June. Today's
Yes.
July 1st. June was a Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and we also had Father's Day there. But focusing on grief, it's something men often don't like to do. Not many people do. Tell us how men should go about doing that.
So I think you're absolutely right. Coming off of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, there was so much focus, and we'd be remiss not to talk about men and their mental health. And oftentimes when we look at men, we think of them as protectors and providers. But those are just kind of like two things that encompass them. There's so much more. So then when Father's Day rolls around, there was so much grief associated with it, because what about if your father isn't here anymore? So we often think about the celebration of life, and being able to do things with our fathers. But if they're not present, that can feel really, really heavy. And so oftentimes we're getting these text messages all day about Father's Day. But then even from the perspective of, if our father maybe is no longer here, but what if we've even lost a child? And those are things that we don't often think about. So looking at tips to kind of deal with grief, it can be a very helpful way. Setting boundaries is really important. We think about summertime as just a beautiful time to be together with family, but it's also a time where we have these get-togethers where our feelings of grief may be even heightened. So being able to set boundaries and maybe deciding that, yes, I won't isolate, but I'll be cautious about maybe where I go and who I interact with, that may actually heighten those feelings even more. But then something that's also really great is also having tributes.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe in the summertime you did things like maybe going fishing with your dad, or maybe you did things like playing golf with your dad. Those are things you might greatly miss, but maybe doing something in honor of them.
Now, when you say something like that, doing something in honor of them, is that kind of what you call embracing the grief?
Yes.
And how important is that?
So it's really important. And one thing you will always hear is that people will tell you that time heals all wounds. I don't know about that. I think when grief is heightened and when grief is present, you're going to always miss the person. But it's important to embrace it, because it's okay to not be okay. That loss is significant, and it's okay to acknowledge that. I look at grief very much like a mirror. When you walk past the mirror and you see your reflection, you think about your mom, your dad, maybe even how you look like them. But once you lose them, it feels like that mirror is shattered. That mirror may never quite be right back together or whole again, but you can figure out ways to put pieces back together that help you remember them in beautiful ways. For example, these tributes. So it's a great way of being able to remember them, especially in a season that was good, versus remembering them maybe if they were sick or they were ill in very negative ways.
Another way people help cope with grief is through support groups. But
Absolutely.
I've read that men are more hesitant to join a support group than women. I mean, that's probably just something in our DNA. But what would you suggest men do to get over that stigma, let's say?
That's an excellent thing. Support groups can be helpful, but I even know for myself, depending on what I'm going through, I might not want to be around a lot of people talking about my feelings, right? But there's something beautiful about individual therapy. So maybe seeking out one individual, vetting them out, going online, finding a therapist that maybe specializes in grief, and then having that one-on-one time to be able to work through those emotions. Where are those emotions coming from? And then one thing we didn't mention is that grief can also be associated not with just the loss of a parent, but also the absence of one who was never in our lives. And so that's something also we can talk about with a therapist or a social worker or a counselor that can really be helpful in being able to process those emotions and those feelings.
All right, we've talked about embracing the grief and maybe supporting help, getting some supporting help for that. But you have to acknowledge the grief and allow yourself to grieve for a period of time. Do you not? That's what they always say.
Absolutely, and there is no time frame for that. Oftentimes we will often feel like, well, I should be over this by now. But that's something that we put on ourselves. There's no time frame for grief. Allowing yourself to cry, it's very cathartic. Maybe involving in things like going for a walk if you don't want to be around people to express those emotions. But definitely going through that process is essential in order to grow through or to get through it.
And it's always so important to talk about how you feel as well. You got to find somebody, whether it's in a support group or your counselor or friends or family, if they're willing.
Absolutely. Even those around us who may not be educated, so to speak, in the lines of grief, can be supportive just in their presence. So being able to utilize friends and family can be very helpful, especially if they're experiencing the same emotions.
Mental Health Monday. Natalie,
Yes.
always grateful when you
Always.
drop by and help us with our mental health.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.